if there is really a global event like a World War III. That 6 hour window is the single most important thing in the world. It's the time you have to exit and go to where you need to go. The moment an alarm is launched where that first day, first strike, first launch, our life will never be the same. And then you would have seen really what chaos would look like. Right now, the conflict in Europe is not showing any signs of slowing down. And it's only going to get worse, especially European countries. The governments are actually launching a very concerted awareness campaign where they're telling people, gotta have some water, you gotta have some medicine, you gotta have some food, you gotta have some basics in case of an emergency. Right now, more than ever, people that I know are definitely taking the matter very, very seriously and are moving as fast as they possibly can. After the financial crisis of 2008, I set a goal that I definitely need something that will offer protection in case of financial crisis or a social upheaval. I want to be able to close my door, and for 2 years I have everything I need. It's just the reality of life. Storms come and you need to make sure that you're ready. And all the preps in the world are worthless if you're not having them very well protected. We're entering some very precarious and uncertain times. Subterranean warfare seems to be one of the preferred methods of warfare. In China, they consider it as part of their future strategy. 5,000, 6,000 kilometers of these things that are being built. And I wish we would start building a lot more elaborate fortifications for every single citizen.
It's definitely becoming a bit more of a fad in Western culture to have a bunker. But I still think it's at the level of fad, and there certainly is no civil defense initiatives currently being undertaken in North America, certainly not in Canada. And I think because we're such an impressionable lot that we will likely, when the government presents us with that proposition that we should start to prepare for these emergencies, because we live in such a politically divisive climate right now, I could see it becoming a very contentious issue. There would be a lot of doubt. There would be a lot of conspiracy surrounding what the aims and what the motivations were for delivering such a message. Because it's not ingrained in our culture as it is in these other societies, I think it could be very difficult to implement at this stage in the game. So it seems like they're doing it piecemeal, and I know me and you have had conversations about how they're trying to slowly encourage the public to prepare without shocking them, without shocking them out of perhaps supporting any sort of foreign policy initiatives that might be actually bringing us closer to that eventuality. So I do think it would be very challenging to implement at this point, certainly from a government initiative, civil defense initiative. I just don't see it happening anytime soon. But they're slowly starting to prime people mentally for that. We did have that during the Cold War, where there was a culture of preparedness, but now it seems that it's being associated, there's a stigma to it. You're considered paranoid because you're not spending your money on other consumerist pursuits that keep the fake economy propped up. But maybe the government will get the idea that, hey, this is a great way to stimulate the economy, is get everybody prepping, get them to start storing and consuming stuff and putting stuff in bunkers. Maybe somebody will get the bright idea, the economic benefits of this. Do you have any thoughts on, perhaps, in your own inner circles, are people starting to, I don't know how open you are about your own bunker and your own preparedness. Do you get the sense that people are starting to take more of an interest in this?
First, you remember we had the discussion once, you and I, about the journey between awareness to preparedness, right? To go from awareness to preparedness is a very long journey, an expensive one, time consuming, so on and so forth. So it's very positive that right now, especially European countries, the governments are actually launching a very concerted awareness campaign where they're telling people, you gotta have some water, you got to have some medicine, you got to have some food, you got to have some basics in case of an emergency. So that, in a way, that's the beginning of an awareness campaign. And I could see them escalating this and increasing it and improving upon it, because it starts there, the awareness first that you need this. And we have been living, when I lived in Europe and I bought my bunker there, honestly, I didn't think about a war scenario. I bought it because, since I lived in Switzerland at the time, and the financial crisis happened, I was very concerned about a financial crisis type situation, a social unrest, because we did see social unrest in Europe during the 2008 financial crisis, car break-ins, car burning, looting. I mean, on a limited scale, but nonetheless, I mean, if that situation wasn't remedied quickly and the US took a leadership position in terms of remedying that 2008 financial crisis, it could have easily went sideways if they didn't take immediate action to stop the contagion in the financial crisis. I mean, those ATMs could not have worked. And then you would have seen really what chaos would look like. So that triggered me at that time to really start thinking about making the transition to get my own bunker. And of course, it has a lot of challenges. I mean, it's hard to find, hard to get, hard to fix, hard to repair. I mean, it's just the many challenges. But at the end of the day, it's extremely fulfilling, and it's extremely important because you feel like, I have an insurance policy, just like if you have a health insurance, just like if you have a car insurance, life insurance. It's very useful. And in terms of preparedness, I mean, it took us literally 2 years of paperwork and bureaucracy just to close the deal on the bunker, which was sold in auction. And we set up a policy at that time, a strategy. I said, I want to be able to, if in case of emergency happened, close my door, and for 2 years I have everything I need. And I put a set of conditions. And anyway, I mean, so I was very fortunate that I was able to, after seeing 40, 50 properties across Switzerland and Austria, because I only wanted Switzerland and Austria, I wanted neutral countries, that I was able to find this one. And it took us, like I said, a year and a half, 2 years just to go through the red tape and the qualifications and the process to finally get it. My ex-wife and I at the time, we literally just had an agreement between us that if we send each other a particular message, that means go. That's what it means, because I was traveling a lot and we just wanted to have that peace of mind that, God forbid, if an emergency happens, I want to make sure that she's taken care of, the family's taken care of. And yeah, I could tell you in terms of preparations, um, there are a lot of talks right now about people should speed up their preps, and not based on any confidential information or anything, but I mean, you have to take a look. Like I said, it's what I do is threat analysis, risk assessment. You take a look at what's going on around the world, the amount of variables, the amount of black swans, the amount of the number of uncertainties and question marks and variables. And I'm a history buff and a research buff, and I've never seen anything like it. I've never even heard of anything like it with the scale, the scope, the speed, the velocity of the news and the changes is just unprecedented on every level. So part of the friends that I have and whatnot, yeah, I mean they're definitely working on their and you can never, I mean, let's put it this way, prepping is a lifelong journey, so to speak, because you get yourself half a ton of honey and you say, well, why not 550, not 600 kilograms, not 700? Like it's an endless journey. But I could say that right now more than ever, people that I know are definitely taking the matter very seriously and are moving as fast as they possibly can, because for all the above mentioned reasons prior. And I think people having their own bunker or their own shelter or their own bug out place or their own ruler cabin somewhere, it's not a bad idea at all under any circumstances. I think the pandemic was one of the reasons that made a lot of people re-examine their lifestyles in a positive way. I mean, we're fortunate right now. You have something like Starlink, where you could be. I mean, I could be 7, 8, 9 hours from Toronto at my place, and I could just easily, do my business as usual, so to speak. Historically, that was difficult, but now with Starlink and connectivity, remote connectivity, it's much easier. But I could say without a shadow of a doubt that, considering all the events that are happening right now and the supply chain disruptions, I could see, and I know for a fact, a lot of my friends in Europe in particular are moving as fast as possible to get themselves ready for any eventuality or any contingency. And the logic is, I mean, if nothing happens, what have you lost? But if something does happen, it's way too late. And that's a fact. I highly encourage people to look at the global events, the economic events, the increasing inflation, the supply chain. Supply chain is going to be a bigger challenge than most people think, because as we migrate and change from the global model to a more regional and national model in terms of economic distributions of manufacturing of products, those shipping lanes that have proven to be less than secure, that's going to just exacerbate the pricing of everything that you might be importing from east to west or exporting from west to east. So there are a lot of factors that people have to take into consideration, other than the fact that the economic slowdown, the increasing pricing, the inflation, and they have to also account for the artificially low energy cost. These energy costs are right now do not, in my humble opinion, reflect the real price discovery in the marketplace that equates supply and demand, and sure as heck there is no risk premium attached to them. So the moment that reaches some sort of a free market pricing, I think people are going to start seeing some very, very, very volatile movements in inflation and in economic indicators, and that could trigger social unrest. I mean, we're already seeing in Europe, you have just tremendous amount of demonstrations. I mean, it's part of the democratic process, I guess. But you're seeing the farmers' demonstration. You're seeing the strikes by the transportation unions. You're seeing all sort of discontent. And it all ties together. Nothing is taken in vacuum. I mean, we have to look at Professor Mandelbrot, the old butterfly effect. A butterfly flutters its wings in Brazil and a hurricane happens in Japan, for example. So, I mean, everything is connected. Nothing is disconnected. And definitely you're seeing on the military side that everybody's arming up. It looks like that's all the news cycle right now is covering is conflicts and increasing conflicts and new conflicts. And yeah, I mean, I think we're entering some very precarious and uncertain times.
And the normalcy bias is so pervasive right now that in spite of all of these threats and all of the risks, it's amazing that even though we're in this Goldilocks zone of opportune times to prepare with these low energy prices, as you say, which are being artificially, kept down by numerous factors, we're going to look back at this period of time and a lot of people are going to be kicking themselves because the conditions are so perfect right now in terms of your ability to prepare, your ability to procure the things that you might need in a bad situation as cheap as they're ever going to get, I believe. But the risks are so obvious as it's ever going to get. So you have like the preparations which are so readily available still at this point in time, because I can tell people if the pandemic was any measure of how quickly supply runs out. I mean, when the pandemic hit, just a little sidebar here, we had, we probably had hundreds of respirators in stock. And like, I'd say within the span of half a day, everything was sold out. And from that point forward, for months and months, there was supply shortages. And people think they see a little glut in the market here and there right now in terms of various products. But I can tell you, if something were to happen tonight, we would be completely sold out by tomorrow of all the basics. So, and this is because of the just-in-time delivery system. And in spite of all this, these risks that are so glaring and obvious, it's just incredible to me that people still need to be persuaded this day and age to do what it is you're doing. Now, I want to hear a bit more about your bunker, so I want to stay on that topic, but maybe you can, I think you have something to respond to.
Yeah, well, there's an old saying, for those that know, no explanation is needed. For those that don't, no explanation is possible. And what happens is, unfortunately, with the normalcy bias, people sometimes, the wishful thinking is just overwhelming, and I sympathize with that. I mean, who wants to stress? I mean, nobody's looking for extra stress in their life, but we have to look at it just like going to a dentist or just like going to a doctor, it's a must do. I mean, we don't buy car insurance because we wish to get into a car accident. We don't buy health insurance because we wish to get sick. We don't buy life insurance because we want to die. It's just something that is something that you have to do. And I 100% agree with you that right now is the opportune time to prep, because personally, I'm not an economist, but I'd like to share because I travel quite a bit and I see things around. I think we're about to enter a deflationary shock in certain asset classes, which is customary before hyperinflation usually. So because higher interest rate environment created a real slowdown in terms of spending, because everything is tied to interest rates, right? So your credit card payment, if you had a housing payment that was $1,000 and now it's $2,000, that just took away from your disposable income a big chunk. And the same thing with your auto loan and the big ticket items, let alone the credit cards, which, the default rates are at all-time high. And so from a perspective of consumerism, the prices are going to start to drop because that's the only way retailers are going to be able to move products. Actually, I just, right before I get on online with you, I received a message from one of the general managers of one of the biggest retailers in the Western Hemisphere. And the message was dire. I mean, he said, I've never seen in my life worse sales than I'm seeing right now. And this company is quite large in North America. And for him to say that, it means, so basically these companies will have to drop the prices to entice any buyer. That usually creates a loss of profitability, which means shutting down facilities. That creates the deflationary shock. And then afterwards, when demand comes back online and you have to recreate the production supply chain, that's when the price goes out of control because it takes a long time and there's a gap between the two. So, and that's notwithstanding any geopolitical black swans, that's notwithstanding any sort of global conflict that might affect the oil price. I was listening to Colonel Wilkerson the other day, and he was talking about a war game simulation. Wilkerson, of course, is Powell's deputy secretary, and he was saying that in 2009 they simulated a war game. I forget if it was with China or with Iran, and in 2009 that war game led to the prediction of $300 oil. And they were trying to war game, where do you move oil from, how do you compensate for the gaps, and so on and so forth. And even with all that, it was $300, and that's 2009. So there are a lot of things to consider. And that's one of the things, like for me in my own, I mean, I could share my own personal practices. Once I made the decision to start prepping, this is like on the heels of 2008 financial crisis. I traveled so many times, 40, 50 properties. I had to see bunkers that I was looking for a specific set of conditions that I wanted in that bunker. And I wanted a property that basically had certain features. I wanted it to be in a neutral country. I wanted it to be in a private location. And I wanted it to be off-grid with a high protection level. And then that was a challenge to find. And once you find it, repairing it is a challenge. But then afterwards, in terms of prepping, literally, we stocked it up with everything you could possibly need for 2 to 3 years of non-perishable items. So, for example, olive oil, is something that if it's preserved properly, it could last for a long time. Honey, I think we packed about half a ton of honey. Canned goods, I don't know, 5,000, 6,000 cans, and so on and so forth. And you put that, and it was an amazing experience for us because you learn so much as a normal person. My background is in tech, so in terms of physical work on things, repairs, agriculture, the stuff, it was very fascinating to learn, and it was it was a wonderful experience, and you learn a lot. But I encourage people to basically try to, as much as possible, stock up what's on sale. I mean, keep an eye, keep being informed about what's out there. And whatever is really significantly on sale, take advantage of that. For example, last year, there was a restriction on the export of rice from India, I believe. That restriction has somehow loosened up, that dropped the prices. That would be a good opportunity, for example. I mean, for me, I'm not giving financial advice. I'm just saying that these are the type of things that people will maybe need to consider, because the moment, and I agree with Nate 100%, the moment an alarm is launched where that first day, first strike, first launch, our life will never be the same. That is a given, unfortunately, and I pray to God that that never happens. But at the same time, realistically, what's happening right now globally is unprecedented. I mean, there's no words that could describe it. And I'll tell you one thing. I agree with you, Nate, that there are a lot of people that still could do more in prepping, but I would say the awareness level have gone up exponentially. I have people that historically have never even thought about prepping or just any sort of contingency plan, that all of a sudden, albeit a small percentage, but still better than what it used to be, they start asking questions about how do you do this, how do you do that, and I think the awareness is happening, especially for people living in Europe, because now you're seeing a country like Latvia with the call back the conscription, right? So now you have mandatory conscription in Latvia. You're seeing the Swedish defense minister, the UK defense minister, issuing dire warnings that about preparation and about that we will be going to war with Russia. I mean, these things are not to be taken lightly. And of course, Admiral Bauer, the one of the heads of NATO, issuing that discombobulated advice. He obviously was caught right. He wasn't expecting the question, so he probably didn't formulate the right answer he wanted to. But nonetheless, it was disturbing because when a guy like that says, "Yeah, you should be prepping," in a past tense type thing, then these things have to be taken pretty seriously, because we are facing right now adversaries that are completely different than the days of Desert Storm. We're facing threats that we have not faced before. They're all asymmetrical, whether it's cyber war, whether it's these underground fortifications that have proven to be extremely elusive and difficult to defeat. Until today, we don't know if there is a solution that is a one size fit all or a scalable solution to deal with these things. And every indication points to the fact that these conflicts are just going to multiply and get worse and worse, unfortunately.
Yeah, on the topic of deflation, I do believe that we may, emphasis on may see a deflationary cycle, but I'm not entirely sure about that. I know they're seeing that in China right now, because on the one hand, you're having the East and the global South start to rise up in terms of their consumption patterns. There is going to be a scarcity of energy at some point, if only due to, like we've been talking about, the disruption in the shipping lanes and the distribution of energy. So while there might be, and I totally understand what you're saying when you say that deflation can lead to inflation ultimately, and it's actually going to make it worse when the alarm hits, because the industrial capacity is not going to be there. It's a lot more difficult to restart the industrial base once it's been diminished and gone offline and the businesses have closed down because there's not enough people buying stuff. But I do believe that in spite of all of this, in spite of all of the supposed things that should be deflationary right now, or in the very least disinflationary, we're still seeing inflation go up, which is concerning. So prices are still going up in spite of the fact that people are buying a lot less, in spite of the fact that their money is buying a lot less. So you're having a new X factor, which is the de-dollarization kind of factoring into this as well. So depending on where you live, your currency might not be buying as much as it used to. And that's how that inflation is rearing its head.
Well, I mean, if I may, not to interrupt you, but there's an important point I'd like to make. Most of the time, people are under the impression that you have to have either deflation or inflation. Truth of the matter is you could have inflation, deflation simultaneously across different asset classes, right? So for example, you could have an event in case of economic downturn, right? You could have the luxury items deflate to no end, right? Luxury cars, Rolexes. All people don't want them because,
Teslas.
Depression. Right? Teslas. Yeah. Sorry.
You buy a Tesla and the next month it's down 20 grand.
Yeah, well, but that's my point, is you could have a deflation and an inflation at the same time. Look at the Great Depression. So for example, these luxury items, they could actually drop to significantly, and they deflate because the demand is not there. But you could have other things, some that are necessities, some are unexpected, that the price will go through the roof. During the Great Depression, for example, alcohol went through the roof, right? Clothing, which is strange. Certain food, of course, that's, you know. So what I'm trying to say is you could have both deflation and inflation simultaneously, but across different asset classes. And that I use that actually in my own personal life to view things. So I follow certain indicators. For example, price of Rolexes, availability of Rolexes. If you remember 2 years ago, I walked into a Rolex shop. I don't know if I told you the story. I walked into a Rolex shop and they said, "We don't have inventory. You have to make an appointment." I was laughing because I didn't walk in there to buy. I just wanted to see why was there a line, because I thought that would be an economic indicator of sort. So I said, "What do you mean you need an appointment?" She said, "Well, there's no inventory, because of the deflationary shock that we had, or the production drop that we had because of the pandemic." Now you go to the same store, it's stocked up, right? So the price back then went through the moon because there was no supply. But now, because of the economy being bad, its prices are dropping. But you look at the price of food is going to the roof. Look at the prices, for example, of vegetables, right? That's something. People look at vegetables as a food, and it is a food. I look at it as a reflection of the price of fertilizer, because it's a very consuming, very fertilizer intensive type thing. So I look at it as a disruption in the supply chain of fertilizer that feeds the, and of course, the insurance of the shipping containers that are bringing the vegetables and the food from other countries. So there's a lot to look at. And right now, we're going to have so much, in my personal opinion, so much volatility and unpredictability that I could tell you whatever principles we've learned about supply and demand, PE ratios, the principles that are the guiding principles for economics. And now I am of the school, the Austrian School of Economics, having lived in Vienna for so long, that I think we're going to see some major disruptions, unpredictable disruptions in the supply chains and the pricing. So whatever people, in my humble opinion, what I do is whatever I think I need, my family needs, I take advantage of whatever the opportunities in terms of deflation, and I stock up. Remember a few weeks ago, we talked about solar panels, right? And at that time, the price of solar panels was dropping precipitously, and I think it's going to drop even more. I was stocking up. So, whatever, you have to keep an open mind at this point and try not to apply a one size fits all is my advice to anybody that's
Yeah,
looking
because those prices are not going to stay that way
absolutely,
forever.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
in fact, it's almost the reversal. Like, it's like a pole flip. Like, it will, as fast as those prices are, or as much as those prices might be deflationary now, those things will be an incredibly short supply in the future because of that bullwhip effect in the markets.
Yep. Yep.
Now I'd like for you to tell us a bit about your bunker, because you're now living in North America. You talked about how you're not too far from Toronto, and you had a bunker in Europe. You still have it. Maybe you could tell us a bit about how that bunker is different from other types of bunkers. And people want more information about it because it is actually available. And I've been telling people, if you live in Europe and you're a person with the means to do so, you should definitely be pursuing what we're talking about today. And I don't represent any company. I don't have any affiliate commissions. Me and Ron are buddies at Atlas Survival, but I don't get any commissions. I don't want any. Whatever I do on the channel with bunker builders is strictly just because I want to get people informed about this stuff. But maybe you could tell us a bit about how your bunker differs, and just a bit about your experiences with, personally having one, and some considerations.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Nate. Yeah, it was quite a journey. I mean, in 2005, 2006, when I was living in Switzerland, I mean, I definitely, the idea of bunkers and whatnot was not really on my mind. But like I said, after the financial crisis of 2008, I set a goal that I definitely need something that will offer protection in case of financial crisis or social upheaval. And it took us, I think, about a couple of years of search around to be able to finally find this property in Austria. I was fortunate enough, it was being auctioned by the government because at the end of the Cold War, these properties have gone into disrepair, and they were costing the European government significant amount of money. So they started putting them in auction for the public. It's open for the public. There is a very strict criteria on you owning it. And took us about a year and a half of going through red tape just to be able to acquire it. But we were fortunate because it had everything that we were looking for. And I give this advice to people who are looking for similar properties in the future, that they could learn from my experience. We wanted to a place that was basically private, off of the beating path. So if you have your privacy, concealment, and it offered some land so you could have some sustainability in terms of agriculture, in terms of building, and of course high degree of protection, because we're more or less pacifists. So conflict is not what we wanted. We wanted, in case of a global problem, that basically you just go into your bunker, lock your doors, and you're fine. And it took us a long time to find it, and it took us a long time to get it. And then when we got it, it took us years and years of repairs. It cost me significant amount of money in terms of repairs, because you can't bring, that's one of the mistakes that I'd like people to avoid in the future, is the repairs on these type of properties is not the same as a home repair. This is called extreme engineering here. So if you want to hang a painting on your wall, you're not going to be doing it with normal DeWalt drill. You're going to need one of these heavy Hilti hammer drills to be able just to punch in 2 inches, because the walls are 1.5 meters thick of concrete, reinforced concrete. So it took us a long time, because psychologically I wanted to make sure the place felt like a home. It didn't feel like a bunker, because for psychological reasons, we thought, if I'm going to be sitting there for a long time, I want to be able to be relaxed. And that's something I'd like to share with people, the experience in terms of living in a bunker. I stayed a few nights. I didn't live in the bunker, let's put it this way. But it's very quiet, very serene, just no noise, no electronic pollution. We painted the ceilings to match a sky, so that basically you're able to feel like you're outdoors, and the ceilings are high. And we paid attention to all these little details that make it feel like a home. It's warm, it's cozy, it's comfortable, and everything is redundant. The heating system is 4 times redundant. The electric system is 2-3 times redundant. The water system is 2-3 times redundant. Like Ron used to say, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So we took it a step further. 3 is 2, 2 is 1, and 1 is none. So we had all the redundancies that you could think of. And it gave us really, a peace of mind in terms of knowing that in case of emergency, you have a place to go to. And we stocked it up, that it could have everything for 2 years that you possibly need, as far as food, medicine, tools, equipment, even movies. We made sure that the psychological and mental wellness aspect was very, very well paid attention to, from the color selections to the lighting selections to a lot of little things that basically make you feel that you're not really in a bunker. It's not what you see in the movies. This feels more like a home. And I had a great time there. The property comes with 6.5 acres of fenced land around it. It has a little cabin on top. So we used to have barbecues there. We used to have friends over for parties, and nobody even knew that there was a bunker there, because it was so well camouflaged. You could pass right by the door and not know. But the big difference with military bunkers, this is one of the things that was really fascinating for us, is the little attention to details that the designers have. For example, to put a water well right in the center of the heart of the bunker, so that you have your own water source. That's extremely important. And the filtration system.
Is that like a well?
A real well, yes. This is a real well. And they dug it. This work was done by the Army, not by us.
And the well is still operational?
I haven't been there in 2 to 3 years. I have a property manager that takes care of it, but I would assume it is. But if it's not, usually you just
dig a little lower.
Just dig lower a little bit. And so that water well was extremely important. Also, the fact that the whole place is EMP proof, and it has EMP power generation. It has 0 oxygen rooms for storing so if you want to store food or whatever, this is the place they used to store ammo. So it made sure that there was no ventilation that goes there, which is perfect for storing food so it doesn't spoil. But there are a lot of attention to details. Like, for example, they had a lot of security features that were built in there with redundancy. So to go in, you have to go through 5 different access doors, for example. You know, everything is 90 degrees to deflect any pressure from any. I mean, of course, that's part of their design. And the radiation, in terms of radiation, this offers the highest protection from radiation because you have about 2 meters of concrete. That's the roof, and the walls are about 1.5 meters, and then you have the dirt and the soil. And by the way, I mean that little experience when I hear people saying, well, you could smoke somebody out or you could flood it. I can tell you that that is just as far from reality as possible because, for example, you have about 3 or 4 different escape routes from the tunnel that was designed by the army from emergency exits. Even if somebody knew where that emergency exit, and even if they dropped at the time of war a satchel or a charge there, it was designed that it will have zero effect almost. Why? Because they put very cleverly a well below the threshold of entry. So if you drop it, it's not going to go right at the same level as the bunker. It's going to drop like 1 meter below, and it has a 90-degree angle to deflect the explosion to the outside of the bunker. So what you see in the movies and what you see in Hollywood is so far from reality in terms of flooding a place. That's almost also impossible because it has perfect plumbing, and the plumbing was designed actually for 22 soldiers, I think, to stay there for a long time. So you can imagine
How big this place is, yeah.
Yeah,
What was the square footage of that place? Or it is the square?
Yeah, the place is about 2,700, 2,800 square feet. I think it's a little bit more than that, which is about 280 square meters. It's sitting on 2 levels.
And tell us a bit about like right when you go into the bunker, there's that, it looks like this concentric squares. Is that like some kind of gun mount position or fortification? What is that?
Well, I mean, when I did the repair, there are a lot of things we were not allowed to touch in terms of modification or changing. You could just improve. That area was designed as that's the guard room that protecting the entry tunnel, and the entry tunnel is quite long. So the idea was you have these multiple doors, and these doors were steel pipes, right? So basically, the guard could see who's coming from a distance, but at the same time, their access is blocked. And that's where he would fire. That would be his firing position. And one interesting design feature is these concentric type of circles. They're actually made of wood, and behind them steel. And I asked at the time the engineer, I said, why would you use wood? He goes, so it wouldn't deflect. I'm like, okay. So there will be no ricochet. If somebody's firing, that there will be no ricochet at to anybody. So, I mean, little features like that were just like mind-boggling. So the access was so secured that I could imagine if these guys just locked the door. I mean, let's say for civilians like us, I mean, I don't see a way in heck anybody getting in, to be honest with you. And that gave us sort of a peace of mind because you could go in, lock the door, and just relax.
When you said about strict criteria owning it, could you maybe expand a bit on what that was, and if somebody is like interested in purchasing it, like what would they have to be concerned with?
Well, let me separate 2 things. When I was purchasing the property, I was purchasing it from these were government auctions, so they're open for everybody, and they have set a very strict criteria for the applicants. So then they had to do a background check. They have to verify your funds. They have to verify your CV. They had to verify just 1,000,001 things. And you had to repeat the process almost every step of the ladder, right? But now that it's in private hands, selling it is completely a different story. But the transition from a government asset to a private asset, that's extremely complicated, highly regulated, and red tape. So that took us 1.5 to 2 years to go through, and there were tons of other people that were going through the process, and it was quite painful and expensive, but thank God everything worked out. But now in terms of actually selling it is much easier because it's owned by a holding company. So it's basically pretty much anybody that's legally allowed to own shares, to own a company could own it. And this is a specific, what they call specific purpose vehicle company. So it was built specifically just to hold this asset, and all people have to do is just basically, and Europe and especially Austria, they have what they call the notar system, meaning you don't really have somebody representing you, they represent the government. So the buyer and the seller go to the notar, and the notar basically holds everything from both sides, and they handle the whole transaction. Similar to like California escrow system, but not quite the same, because the notar doesn't really represent anybody. He represents more or less, I think, the government. So the buyer and the seller go there, and they just give them the information, and they make sure that the process is followed from A to Z. So it's very, very easy to do on the private side, and very regulated and very systemic.
So if, people are interested in learning more about that, we'll post some information in the description below. I think
Yeah,
it's one of those opportunities that's that particular bunker. I mean, it's very hard to visually represent what it actually is. And I know we've wanted to do a video on it in the past, but unless I actually go there, which I'm probably going to have to, I'm not going to be able to truly understand its capabilities and the layout of the place, because it's hard to show on camera, and when people see it, it will seem small, it will seem a lot bigger, depending
yeah.
on what lenses we use. So that's always a challenge, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, one of the reasons I was reluctant to do anything elaborate is because I wanted to make sure, like, I really didn't want to sell the property at all. I mean, it's just there's like a part of me, because I did most of the work myself, and it was a learning experience, and it was I have a lot of wonderful memories there. But my mother is Canadian, and after the pandemic, we took a decision as a family that we just want to be together in case of an emergency, and we pretty much share the same type of view about the world. So it was much easier for me to move to Canada, where my mom is and my family, than it is for me to move everybody from Canada to Austria, so to speak. And that's the only reason, really, I even contemplated selling it. But because it does feel very personal, and it's just part of you is in there, because it was never meant to be put for sale, so to speak. Um, and one of the reasons I was hesitant about like putting it in terms of out there is because the address, you don't want to reveal the address to anybody. You want to make
Sure.
sure that
Yeah.
even the people that would go and see it, they have to sign confidentiality agreement that they cannot reveal the location, because you want whomever get this to have the same advantages we had, which is that you have total privacy. It's totally camouflaged from the outside. Nobody knows its exact locations, even if they saw the photo, but you don't know where it's really at. And it offers people that peace of mind. And we used it, like I said, for weekends, holidays, barbecues, and whatnot, because people would be out. And I used to always get a kick how people would pass like 5, 6 feet away from the main entrance, and nobody would even know that they're passing next to it. But and it's a unique experience. I mean, it's something that's very personable, and it meant a lot to me, so to speak, because it's a way of life. And like you, I mean, I believe in prepping as a lifestyle, and not in any bad way, but it's just the reality of life. Storms come, and you have to make sure that you're ready. And right now, the conflict in Europe is just not showing any signs of slowing down. It's not showing any signs of abating, and it's only going to get worse. And there are really only two countries that are neutral in Austria and Europe, and that's Austria and Switzerland. And those are really the two choices. We're fortunate here in North America because we have the Pacific and the Atlantic, and Canada is such a beautiful and large country that basically, if you're really far away uh, from the main cities, so to speak, you should be in pretty good shape, so long as you have taking care of everything that you need. And I'll send you my email if anybody's interested. They could email me, and I'll forward it to the property manager that's handling the property. And they just people need to know this is for serious inquiries only, and I think that's sort of self-explanatory. And I
Yeah.
hope it takes care of them, good family, and they have as much fun as I had in it, and protects them and takes care of them.
What do you think about the psychological effects of living in a bunker? Is there considerations? Because I think a lot of people, they get the idea that they're just going to be in there for, indefinitely, and they're going to be surviving years in this bunker. What are the psychological considerations of
You
that?
know,
And you
sorry.
talk a little bit about, painting the ceiling, and is there any other measures that you're aware of that other governments do, or to make their bunkers a bit more hospitable?
Well, in terms of government bunkers, to be honest with you, I've never been to one where I felt cozy. Let's put it that way. But I could tell you from my experience, and this is over 14 years of experience with this property, is there are a lot of things that are underestimated that make a huge difference. For example, Ron visited the place and actually uh, was very complimentary. And one of the things that uh, we need, because it wasn't equipped with, is an MBC filter. And for that, we'll go to Ron and get it from him when the time comes if somebody's interested. But one of the things, for example, simple feature, uh, we have three lighting systems, right? So you have redundancy. The normal light that operates on the big generator, right? Then you have LED, which operates off of the solar, the photovoltaic system, and the battery bank that we have. However, when I spent time there, I noticed that LED over a long period of time, doesn't give you the comforting feeling of candles, for example. So if you have a good ventilation system, which I do, and you have very good, and we have actually two different type of ventilation system, and we have mono carbon and CO2 and CO detectors everywhere. But what I noticed, for example, is we have these elaborate, really nice candle fixtures, right? Now, it might appear like nothing, but let me tell you, a candle at night has such a calming effect. It's like a fireplace. It's the little things like that.
Well, it's
The
something
color
that's in our
selection.
DNA. Like fire is something
Yeah,
that is in
yeah.
everybody's DNA, and if you can replicate that on a small scale.
If absolutely. So to be able to have clear air is extremely important, because for me, one of the priorities that I worked really hard on there was I wanted the quality of the air to be exactly like outside. Of course, in case of emergency, then you have to filter. But I'm talking like overall. So the fact that the air is dry and clean makes you feel at home. Things like, for example, these candlelight fixtures that are pretty much everywhere in the place. The color selection. So we went with pastel light so it doesn't reflect the light, so it doesn't tire the eyes. The high ceiling, the ceiling is 9+ feet, so you don't get this claustrophobic feeling. We have a collection of, I think, like 1,500 movies, and we have a big theater like over there, so you could enjoy the movies. You add some things that make you feel comfortable: cotton candy machine, popcorn machines, things that remind you, a lot of reading materials, a lot of reading material, a lot of calming music. I mean, there's so many little things. Like, for example, one of the things that was very important in case of a lockdown for a long period of time was vitamin D, right? Because it gives you a calming effect. So we put there a sauna, an infrared sauna. So it would simulate the sunlight. So you have this calming effect at the same time. You have a full gym, heavyweight, I mean, free weights. You have a martial arts equipment. I mean, so there are a lot of things that you put there to maintain your mental and physical wellness together, because they both go together very, very well. And in case of emergency, the fact that you know that you could be sitting in a place as a civilian and there's nothing anybody could do to get in. I could tell you that emphatically. I'm talking about like civil unrest, that sort of thing. Zero chance anybody's going to be able to get in. It doesn't matter what they do. Um, so that gives you also a calming effect. So we worked on all the components that, as a family, we said, okay, what is it that you like to relax? So candlelight, incense, um, perfumes, lighting. I mean, just a lot of these little things, reading, music, movies that we each like. So each one of us had their own set of collection of movies. Just a lot of things, family pictures. We kept a lot of family pictures, a lot of the um, books, the classics, let's put it this way, of literature. So we technically had the feeling, and the most important thing, by the way, is the hygiene aspect. The fact this place has a huge bathroom facility is enormously important. because that is one of the biggest things that make you feel you're right at home. The plumbing system was incredibly designed very, very well. And you have your own water and your own water filtration. So you pretty much don't feel that you're really in a bunker, because a classic bunker is dripping from the ceiling and you have these harsh concrete walls and that dank smell and
Soviet era.
yeah. Oh, I've been when I'm telling you, when I went and I previewed 40, 50 properties in between Switzerland and Austria. I mean, there were so many of them that were mostly uh, ammo dumps, right? They were storage facilities, because you're not allowed to convert them. You're not allowed to do anything to change them. So here we were really fortunate, because this thing was equipped for 22 soldiers. It had its own kitchen. It had its own 2 bathrooms. So it was ready. It's just, except it was in a horrible state. So that took forever. It took 2 to 3 years just to bring it up to the standards that I wanted, And it was fascinating experience, and you learn a lot. But also from the military point of view, you start appreciate the difficulty that when you ask a soldier to go into a fortified facility, it just sounds, honest to God, scary as heck. I can't even imagine how anybody could do it. And kudos to the rat tunnels of Vietnam. I mean, these guys must have incredible courage, because the old flashlight and a 45, and they used to go down these spider holes, not knowing what's ahead of them. That takes just an enormous amount of courage. But anyway, so as a civilian, I mean, all I could tell people, and I encourage them, is do whatever you can to build your own shelter. I mean, it doesn't have to be an elaborate bunker. If you can, especially if you're in Europe, you'll be if you could afford it, you would definitely need to get that. But elsewhere, I mean, whatever you could do to build some sort of a shelter for you and your family, I think it's the ultimate, the crown jewel of prepping, personally, because at the end of the day, you don't want any conflict. And I tell you, if you apply the principles of these properties, where its concealment is so important, that not to make it elaborate, not to make it visible, you're protecting your family by being passive, that you don't want to be in a conflict. You don't want to confront anybody. So here, if you're well concealed, off the beaten path, and you have all your preps with you, then really psychologically, you're going to be just extremely relaxed, and you don't need to worry about anything else. But it's a journey, but it's a very, very fulfilling journey. And I highly recommend people take advantage of that, whatever they can, to build their own shelters for them and their family. And especially in a place like where weather is a factor, because like I said, even if it's -30, -40 outside, it's 7 degrees, 8 degrees in the bunker, especially if you're in there, it'll be higher because of the body heat. And that's why they built this huge seed vault in Norway, right? Because they knew that the temperature or the climate inside that bunker is steady. And that seed vault is going to be one of the most valuable treasures of humanity one day. And I highly recommend people that you do that, because if save as much seeds as you can, build yourself a bunker, a shelter. It doesn't have to be anything big and fancy. There are 1,000,001 type of designs out there that you could get.
Well, I think that, we as a culture have become incredibly complacent, and we've not had to employ foresight in many things anymore. We've not had to stockpile because it's been a constant feast, and we haven't seen famine in 80 years for the most part, especially during the peace dividend. And so I think it's very hard for people to psychologically approach this with any degree of commitment. But if you're looking at what the government is doing, they have strategic reserves, they have bunkers, and a bunker is a massive force multiplier, as we talked about. You talked about your own bunker, that if, a large group, I mean, when we just use it as an analogy of, okay, what's happening in Gaza, it's requiring the world's best military forces to take out this little space, that is the peace of mind that comes with having a bunker as well, knowing that, if Mad Max shit hit the fan, you'd be able to potentially insulate yourself from those threats. So we're approaching the 3-hour mark with this conversation, and I can see the communist cameraman trembling with fear, knowing
I feel
that
so bad for him.
it's he has to edit a 3-hour video or else he's
He
going to the
must, he must,
gulag.
he must hate it every time I come on because it's just
Well, I think he likes it because you know your stuff and you're so well spoken, and it's very easy for him to find the appropriate B-roll. But it's the length of time I think that we're speaking that is going to drive him to madness. But that's okay because we're all being driven mad in our own ways right now. Is there any other thoughts you have with respect to this, or any closing remarks? Obviously, we could have touched on so many things, and I would encourage people to go and check out a lot of the things that we've researched. Here in the background, there's a Missouri complex, which is 50,000 square feet, that apparently it's just for, food storage, they're saying, but it's because, they don't have to use refrigeration. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about Raven Rock. Don't worry about the 10 underground massive data centers that are storing all our information or all the strategic reserves. Just business as usual and just hope for the best, I guess. But what are your final closing thoughts on all this?
there are two thoughts actually, and I hope the communist cameraman would bear with me a little bit. I should send him some candy or chocolate. But there are two actually pretty important points. One is and I wish in some of your episodes you will start like more because you've done tons of it, but it's just more in terms of people running their own war games, intellectual war gaming. Like, what if, just like they do in business, they do, in disaster recovery, disaster planning. What if each one would just take a pen and a paper, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, and say, what if SHTF happens? What if this happened? What if that happened? These scenarios. What's my level of preparedness? Really, just like self-critique. At the time with my family, we used to time ourselves that if something would happen, that within maximum X number of hours, you have to be just at the bunker, you have to be situated, la 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 la. And every time we did that, we discovered we forgot something. It just never fails. Every single time, no matter how much you think, oh, I got this, you always think, oh my God, I forgot this. Oh, I put this in the wrong spot. Oh, I moved this. It just never, ever fails. So that's one thing I wish people would do as part of, maybe because I'm a chess player, that I'm always running simulations in my head, but it really helps, like tabletop wargaming. Let's put it this way. So that way, it doesn't take a lot of resources, but at least it will get your mind active in that direction.
Well, interestingly, and just to add to that point, the French coureurs de bois, when they were getting ready to embark on their journeys across Canada back during the era of the fur trade, they would actually, for 1 week, they would go and camp out, and they would act as if they were getting ready to go. And, in order to ensure that they had everything they needed, because it's not until you take things from the level of the hypothetical to actually doing something in real life that you really realize, like even myself, having all the preparations and all the toys that I could possibly need, I'll forget stuff all the time because you maybe there's too much, the paralysis of choice even. So in just narrowing down, going and doing these little training runs like you're saying is very important.
Yeah, and the other point is an area that a lot of preppers, I wish they would pay a little bit more attention to, is the concept of, and of course you have to check with the rules and regulations in every country, jurisdiction, and all this legal disclaimers. But in terms of you building your own shelter, really learning how to build your own shelter, and just how to, I wish there would be more body of work on how to do that in a realistic way. I know that YouTube has 1,000,001 quote unquote shelters, but I could assure you with a high degree of certainty about 99.9% of them they just look good on YouTube. But
when you're talking about shelters, like are you talking about like primitive shelters or more like permanent shelters?
Real protection for you and your family that could at the very least provide you you're saying, because listen, all the preps in the world are worthless if you're not having them very well protected. And for me, I'm one of those believers in passive protection because I don't want any confrontation with anybody. I'm sort of pacifist that way, but and you having your own bunker is the ultimate passive, non-aggressive type of protection. Because if you build it right, I mean, listen, if you're not dealing with military, if you're dealing just with civilians, there are a lot of ways of you building a structure that is impervious to any civilian. Um, because at that time, you have to also project at that time what you're going to have in terms of if you're, you have a property somewhere far. What you have is a passerby, like because
Yeah.
these,
They're not going to be as resourceful as
right,
a fully
exactly.
equipped unit.
They're looking for a nice little glass window to break or a door to bust through, whatever. But if you have anything really meaningful in terms of protection, structurally wise, they don't have the heavy equipment. I mean, nobody goes around carrying a bulldozer in their pocket. Yeah? You know what I mean? So you don't have to worry about what in real time. One of the things I always talk to my friends about in terms of prepping is there are three levels of prep. There's the pre, the during, and the post in terms of SHTF, the pre, during, and post. And one of the biggest things that it always escapes people's mind is these type of fortifications, these type of bunkers or shelters that you could build or you could have it built is it mitigates so much of the threat so long as it's concealed and off of the beating path. If all your neighbors know about it, just like in the movie Leave the World Behind, then that defeats the entire purpose. But if you're in the middle of somewhere, nobody's going to have heavy equipment, nobody's going to have time. And if you're in a place that's like in the Alps or here in northern Canada where it's super cold, weather's on your side, you're sitting warm and toasty, and you think somebody's outside sitting there with a crowbar is going to be able to access your place. So I wish there would be more time dedicated to, or more content in the future dedicated to just how to actually build a real security structure, at least just to keep you out of harm's way, not to confront people, but actually to be invisible and have your food, assets, whatever you have, because in that stable environment, the food is going to be good for a long time. And you could sleep better at night, which improves the mental wellness. And it takes you away from people. And one thing that I recommend that I forgot to mention when we did our preps is save 2 years worth of food that doesn't require a flame, doesn't require cooking. So, and that's very important because the first 2 years you have to assume you cannot burn anything. So
And this is why freeze dried is so useful, because
yeah,
you just need water, and people don't factor in, like they look at the cost of freeze dried and they say, well, it's a lot more expensive. And yes, you can soak rice and beans for 24 hours and they will eventually, absorb, but the amount of energy that it's going to be required, and energy is going to be in short supply. And not only that, an open flame, cooking smells, people are hungry, they can smell it from miles away. And, yeah, sorry.
And health is important, health, because freeze-dried food, high-quality food, at that time, there are no hospitals. So you have to be focused on building your immune system to the max. That's one thing I did, was to only store the best quality I could get my hands on at the time. Because it's so, people overlook how important that is, because if you're eating bad, eventually, if you're eating ramen noodles every day, you get a couple of 2-3 weeks before your immune system probably start rebelling. So in terms of having that shelter, and it's so important for, like you said, the food that's not, and people that say, well, I'm just going to garden. I got news for you. You have to budget that you have 2 years that you're not going to know how to plant a thing, right? And one thing we did have is we experimented with forest gardening, where you basically scatter food around and doesn't look like
look like a garden. Yeah,
look like
guerrilla gardening.
Yeah, guerrilla.
Yeah.
I like the term. So the thing is that when I'm talking about a shelter, I'm talking about mostly the elements, because in extreme cold, forget about burning things. If you're at a 7 or 8 degrees centigrade in a bunker or in a shelter, you're already okay. You're already in Canadian spring. Let's put it this way.
It's actually okay. That's something I didn't really consider enough, is just, in Canada, mitigating the exposure threat by, digging deeper. Perhaps we'll wrap it up by making reference to the movie that you just talked about, Leave the World Behind, in that, at the end of that movie, and I just thought about this now, how the people who had the bunker, the people who were the most prepared, and they had all of the measures in place in order to ride it out. You remember that fancy bunker at the end of the movie?
Oh, sure, of course.
Where were they? Why weren't they in that bunker? Was it because they told everybody about it, or were they trying to send us a message there, do you think? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Actually, I have a lot of thoughts on that because I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And the answer was actually part of something that I do as a hobby and I do constantly, which is the awareness, the news awareness. A lot of my friends tell me, oh my God, you follow the news cycle so much and so on and so forth. My answer is I'm looking for the 6-hour window. Let me tell you, that 6-hour window, if there is really a global event like a World War III, that 6-hour window is the single most important thing in the world. Why? Because that's the time you're going to have to, I call it the normalcy bias window. When you sense something is wrong and everybody's going to say, hey, I'm not going to worry about it till tomorrow. Those 6 hours is the time you have to exit and go to where you need to go. And that's why it's so important, that practice of being able to get ready and go in a few hours. So to answer your question is, because while these guys built an incredible bunker, what probably they have failed to have was an exit strategy and timely information. Because that 6-hour window, I am telling you, for me, I follow the news cycle so closely, and I have friends that inform me of what's going on, and I know I stay in touch with you a lot, because it's that 6-hour window that concerns me the most. Because at that time, the highways are still fine. You could still go out. People are still, most people, if the news happens at night, they're going to say, I'm just going to wait till tomorrow, it'll work out itself. That's your window. That's your window. So it's that 6-hour window of you acting first and getting out ahead of the problem to reach where your destination is. That's why, again, I love Gerald said that, what is it?
Gear, guns, and a getaway plan? Gold guns.
And keep in your car at all times that back road atlas.
Yeah.
Really vital, really vital. Because honest to God, I am more worried about those 6 hours than anything else. Because if I'm able to reach my property, the problem is 99% solved. When I say I reach, I'm talking about my family, the loved ones, because those 6 hours, and I've had life experience in this, where those 6 hours make life and death difference if you're able to just be lucky enough to know it. So to answer your question is, I think, honestly, they just did not have an exit plan. They did not have an exit plan.
That was an excellent breakdown of that situation. And, I think on that note, with that actionable information that we've left people with, I think we're going to wrap the video up. Yep. I'm not even sure if the communist cameraman still works here at this point. So, but I want to thank you again for coming out, and I'm sure that we're going to have a cybersecurity incident at some point, and we're going to have to bring you back on once again. But thank you very much for coming out, my friend, and I would encourage people, if you have questions about the bunker that is available in Austria, you can contact us through the link in the description below. So, thanks again for coming out. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.